Hey there, welcome to Data Democracy, a podcast where we explore ways to make data and AI more accessible to everyone. We do this by interviewing experts across industries and asking them, how they think about data, what are some of the challenges they face when it comes to data, and also, if they had a magic wand to get whatever they needed, what kind of intelligence and models they would love to have. We've got a great guest today, MaryBeth Maskovas. MaryBeth is an entrepreneur, a thought leader in data, digital marketing. She is the founder of InsightLime Analytics, which is a digital consultancy agency focused on delivering customer impact. She also runs the digital team at Arch Digital, previously ran analytics marketing teams at eCapacity, Fantastic ES, Kayak, and various other companies in Europe and the US. MaryBeth is a thought leader who talks about leadership, data coaching, customer-centric marketing, data strategies. I just love reading through MaryBeth's blogs and articles because, like me, she's focused on customers' needs first and then kind of building solutions to suit those needs versus the other way around, which I feel, very frustrated about. But yeah, we have a ton of stuff to talk about. So without further ado, welcome, MaryBeth.
Thanks so much for having me. Like I said before, it's so nice to catch up again. It's been a while since we really talked face to face.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for being on our podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. All right, let's get started and tell us about your journey so far. How did you get started and how did you get where you are?
Yeah, that's always a really important question to ask, and I tell this story a few different ways, but I think for this, how I ended up in digital analytics, which as a field, when I got started a little over 10 years ago, wasn't that established yet. Was that I actually have an evolutionary biology background. And during that, I took classes in advanced statistics and I learned R. And just by some happy happenstance, I got recruited at a custom software company that also was a consulting firm as a marketing analyst, because they had this idea that marketing was going to get a lot more data centric and that they were going to need people with a scientific background to be able to evaluate results. They were right, obviously, because things have blown up since then. So that's really where I got started and really fell in love with digital as a whole, but was really enticed by data and what it could do and how you could use it to make a tangible difference that you could see and measure in businesses. So my career took me abroad, and I spent almost 6 years actually in Copenhagen working for several companies, including Kayak, like you mentioned, and consulting, which I've been back and forth in-house and as a consultant. And so when I came back to the US in 2020, trying to decide what to do, I felt like it was the right time for me to start my own consulting firm and consult in the way I wanted and about the things that I wanted.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it definitely, when I talk to you and kind of read through your content, it definitely comes across that you're passionate about both data and marketing. So yeah, you've got the R background and data background that really shows. That's awesome. What does your day-to-day look like at InsightLime?
Yeah, so I kind of wear a few different hats now because so the firm has grown and now we're about 6 people. So my day-to-day is kind of a combination of serving our clients and then also running a business now. So I often have 1 or 2 larger clients that I'm serving either an interim role with. So sometimes I'll sit as a director of analytics or something like that, or running a data strategy project for a client. And then on the other side, I'm creating content for our business and then also coaching analysts and just running the team in general. So, it's right now a pretty balanced schedule between the two and business development, of course. But still get to do quite a lot of hands-on work as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of different roles, different hats that you wear. And also, it's always good to kind of stay grounded with hands-on work. That keeps me, sane a lot of times.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say, there's kind of two approaches to leadership. There's like some people who completely let go of whatever technical work and don't get into the weeds ever. And then there's others that try and keep that alive. And, whether it will drive my team crazy or not, I still want to stay at least a little bit up to date. I'm letting go of some of the details. I'm not going to be our, in-house GA4 expert for every single tag or anything like that anymore. But, I also make sure that I'm still involved in projects and understand like the trends of what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, that's exactly where, how I like to approach as well. I mean, it's a balance. You don't want to get too hands-on and, frustrate the team.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know what their opinion of it is, but most of the time they tell me they're happy. So I think I'm doing a pretty good job. And I try and also like, if I feel like it's something that will step on their toes, I'll like run a project on my own or completely separate from the company just to make sure that I'm still fresh with my knowledge.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great approach that's awesome. So, and any tips for aspiring entrepreneurs in the digital marketing world? What have you learned, and what would you suggest?
I think for someone who's starting out, it does really help to have a strong background in that field already. I know that there's a lot of people who do try and start companies right out of school or whatnot with a lot of experience. But for me personally, having that really strong consulting background where I was able to like get a lot of things right and like get some things wrong on someone else's dime before I started my own company was really beneficial. And, marketing and data are, such broad fields that I'd say that you don't really know exactly where you want to niche down into. And you really do need to do that to be successful until you try on a few different things. And it's much easier to do that while you're employed and you have that safety net than it is to just kind of throw yourself into something and be not sure if that's like the direction that you really want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I mean, I started my career as an entrepreneur. We started building websites for pocket money, but then we quickly realized that we make so many mistakes that it costs us a lot if we are, running a company and also learning at the same time. Like you said, if you can just go learn, make mistakes on somebody else's time and dime, and then
and if any of my past employers are listening, I promise I didn't make that many mistakes.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it just gives you some more flexibility, and you're not worrying about, like you said, running a business is a whole skill set in its own. And I felt really happy that I really knew how to consult and like what I want to consult on and how I was going to do my packages and everything. And I could just focus on like, how do I do taxes and how do I do all these other things that I've never had to worry about before.
Right. And if any of my employers are listening, yes, I'm making a lot of mistakes. I will make a lot of mistakes, but don't make a rule. I mean, from one of my friends, that don't make the same mistake twice. As long as you keep that going, Cool. That's awesome. You talked about R and kind of data analysis and everything. How has data shaped your career so far? How has data played a role in your career?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I think that having that kind of hard, quote unquote, data skills to work with has really defined how I've gone about roles, even when I was in more marketing roles. So when I was a marketing director, et cetera. I think what it did was it gave me a completely different perspective than someone who is coming from more of a traditional marketing background or PR or something like that, because I was really results driven, and I was able to kind of do a lot of the analysis I wanted to do myself, where a lot of other marketers sometimes have to wait for a data team to deliver on something and then like hope that the person got their business context question and everything like that. So that's really defined my career. And as I got into the latter part of working for companies, I realized that I really wanted to specialize into data and be an analyst, like I started as well, and evaluate both marketing and like product data as my focus. So, but yeah, I mean, it's starting with that kind of, now you would call it almost like a data science background of having R, was really helpful in that, because I was able to do things super efficiently too. Things that, like with unwieldy spreadsheets, et cetera, I already kind of had some skill sets there to get that done. Not that like I would say it's like the most important skill, but it's one of the important skills.
Yeah, it definitely helps. And I've learned that marketing and data are joined at the hip, because you can't work one without the other. And it's always good when for me, it's always good to partner with a person who's had some data background on the marketing side, so it makes my job easier, for sure. You're a thought leader, like I said, at the intersection of digital marketing and data. And I know you think a lot about how companies and clients should approach data. Can you please share your thoughts on it and give us some perspective on?
I mean, sorry, go ahead. Was there anything else? Okay. Yeah. So this is, alluding a little bit to something that's going to happen later this year, but I do have a unique philosophy, and I think as time has gone on, I've gotten a little more specific about it. And what it is I think that I want people to feel good about data. And so what that ends up meaning is, as you look in our kind of like data flooded world right now, even though there's a ton of data being generated by pretty much every company, just like overwhelming amounts, not everyone feels super great about it. We don't really use it to its fullest potential. And there's a lot of like waste or spillage of data where we're not, we spend a lot of time collecting it, we're storing it and everything, and we're not using it. And I think what that really comes down to is that there's like these other factors. Like data is the tool, and what we're running into is like there's a lack of trust in data and organization, and people don't feel good about it when someone's sharing something, and they don't feel like it represents the company, and things like that. And so what my approach is, and like in digital marketing, or marketing in general, where that really can create a conflict, because a lot of times marketing is about feelings. And so data comes in, and it can, like a traditional analyst can be so exacting in how they want something. And those two just kind of can sometimes cause some conflict. And so my approach is really like working to make the data quality as good as possible, being really pragmatic about what you're collecting and if it makes sense to collect that. And then on the other hand, focus a lot on like using what you have and using like the most useful data. And what really you need to do first to do that is to make sure you have a culture that's like ready to receive data.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you really have to, there's a lot of intricacies, when it comes to data. I mean, what does having data mean, right? It's,
Right.
especially in the digital world, data is never accurate, and it will be, the accuracy will, or you won't be able to collect everything that you want. You go more so going forward because of privacy laws and everything, and it should be that way, because more power to the consumers, right? But being on the data side, I'm like, oh, no,
Yeah.
I wish I had all the data ever. But yeah, I think you've touched on a point, in terms of our goal. If our goal is to get to intelligence, there are precursors to it, which is you got to have the right infrastructure to collect the data, and then you have to have adoption by the customers or the users, and then you have to get the feedback from them, and then start developing intelligence. So there are a few steps to getting to the intelligence, or be it A/B testing in marketing, or maybe in my world, be developing a machine learning model that needs to be adopted, and then provided some feedback. Only then we can tune it to get to some, although it sounds like some people think of it like magic, it's just iterative process, of getting to a good phase. Yeah. You made some great points there. Um, yeah, I followed you on LinkedIn, and I know GA4 is big on your mind. And can you please tell our audience what is Google Analytics and how companies leverage it to go ahead?
Yeah, it's a great one. I think sometimes we skip over explaining something like that and just assume everybody knows. But Google Analytics is the most popular platform for tracking behavioral data and marketing data for websites and apps. So it's one of the only free solutions. I'm putting a little asterisk by that because there's some things changing. And so what it does is you put a tag on your website. And by tag, it's a little bit of code that goes into the header. And what it does is start to monitor what people do on your site. So when they hit the site, where do they go afterwards? Where did they come from? And gets that general intelligence. And it's really easy to implement too. So almost every site can implement Google Analytics and get something out of that data. So that's my super simplified version of what it does. Obviously, like there's a little bit more that goes into it for bigger companies, but that's the general premise.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's super impressive the way that those little tags can tell us so much about our customers, especially on the behavioral side, how
Yeah.
where they come in, the funnel metrics and all that. But overarchingly, in terms of types of data, I think of it in terms of geographical data when it comes to customers, and then demographics, a little more nuanced, and also psychography, which is behavioral. So Google Analytics is super helpful for us to understand the behavior of our customers within our apps and or websites and stuff like that. So thanks for helping us understand that. Uh, I know you use a couple more tools. Are there any alternatives to Google Analytics that you can tell us about?
Yeah, there certainly are. One of my personal favorites is Adobe Analytics. That's on the enterprise level for sure, but that's I would say, kind of the two big players in the market. And then, of course, there's like a whole suite of more specialized, what I call best of breed tools. So this is something that's once again changing a little bit right now, but previously there's been tools that are a little more focused towards apps. If you're a company that's more focused on having an app, and maybe your website isn't your primary focus, then there's tools like Mixpanel and Amplitude that are also good options. And now they've been around for a little longer than this, but now with the switch of GA4, there's definitely a lot of pain points around that. There's also some other pain points about Google within Europe. There's some other options like Piwik Pro. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. I think I've never heard it pronounced out loud. And there's some other few like free solutions that are also starting to become a little bit more prominent. So there are a lot of options. And then there's also some more custom solutions. So if you were a really advanced company and you wanted something that was completely your own, you could be using something like Snowplow and Snowflake together. So there's also some solutions like that as well. So it's definitely a complicated landscape, but I forget the exact numbers, so I don't want to quote it exactly. But there's a vast majority of sites, especially small to medium businesses, are on Google Analytics.
That's awesome. Yeah, Google Analytics is definitely the biggest player in the market. Can you? I know there's a big shift that Google Analytics is going through. Can you talk about that and what was it originally called and what did that do and what's the next phase?
Yeah, so the current version of Google Analytics that's been around for a few years now is called Universal Analytics. And what was announced, I forget exactly when it was. It feels like it was a really long time ago. I've been slogging through these migrations. Is Google Analytics 4, and that transformation and this is colored by my opinion completely, but someone who's more familiar with also some of those other analytics tools, is that Google is catching on to moving towards event-based tracking. So prior, they were session-based, and really what the difference is there is like event-based tracking is stronger for combining multiple properties. So if you have a website and an app, it was really difficult with Google Analytics, and I thought that they were really weak in it, was measuring app analytics. They just weren't really set up to be event focused, which is what apps are. And so I think that's one of their major moves. I think there's a lot of other pressures of why Google Analytics is changing. And one little like stepping back a bit is that the way this new version is working compared to some of the other version updates that Google has done in the past, you have to completely re-tag your implementation and switch over. So it's really a tool migration, which is brutal, because anytime that you do an analytics tool migration or any other technical tool migration, that's a big strategic undertaking and like a big cost undertaking for companies. So Google announced that they're going to do this and that every company is expected to go on this journey. And whether they were ready or not to go on do that sort of strategic project, they're going to have to, whether they choose to go to GA4 or whether they choose to move on to another analytics tool. And so we're still hearing bits and pieces about like what their final vision is. I honestly couldn't speak to it. It would all be conjecture, but I know it's partially because of some of the privacy pressures that they're switching the way their tool functions. Personally, like I said, I think it's because they're trying to move to a better interface. They've really operated off of these static reports that are very marketer friendly, but their competitors like Adobe Analytics have had a lot more flexibility for some time of making visualizations, catering things, having it be a lot more in the flow analysis. So they're definitely moving towards that, and they're trying to apply some more intelligence to that. That's another thing that they've been a little slow on the uptick for, compared to Adobe, is like anomaly detection and things like that. So I know that was a really broad explanation, but we're going through a strategic technical migration, everybody who was on Google Analytics, to a tool that's going to function pretty differently.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a seismic shift for companies. And a lot of companies are dependent so heavily on Google Analytics that they have to do it. And I think if anybody is interested, July 1st is the deadline.
Yeah, July 1st is the deadline for any non-Google Analytics 360, so the premium version. And then I believe it's October 1st for the Google Analytics 360 customers. So if you're paying for the premium version, you have a little bit more time. I don't know if it's really a fair bit more time, because anyone who's on 360, their implementation is pretty complex. So I feel like they could use a few more months than just that, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, and also the cost difference is huge between, free and 360. We have had we looked into it, and then it was definitely a lot more expensive. Just takeaways for myself as well. GA4 is focused on more about app analytics and also event-based analytics, and it gives us a lot of funnel metrics, and you can customize the way that you would track different buttons, scrolls, different objects within your web pages or app pages. It's a very marketing and data geeks dreamland, in my opinion.
Yeah, and definitely a little bit the more like business users and like not as data focused marketers are going to face a reckoning. That's for sure. It's going to be a very different way of getting information out of the tool.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've been preparing my executives and my teams for is that your historical data, you won't be able to just continue on with it. There will be some differences because the way that these two versions are looking at the data is entirely different. Like we said, session-based versus event-based. So if you've had 1,000 sessions in the past a month, you could see 1,500 or 800. It really has to. It really depends.
Yeah, it's going. I've been seeing that already, and I mean, hopefully, I have been, because, by the way, if you're listening to this and you haven't migrated yet, you're in trouble because you only have a few months, and you're probably not going to finish the migration in time. I still think you should start now, but But yeah, there's going to be discrepancies and also just like differences that aren't really like an issue. But I'm also seeing that like when we start these implementations, sometimes the tracking doesn't really do what we expected. And there's a lot of pieces like that. So have been going through that with clients right now where we think that we got parity and then we're looking, okay, is this a difference in how they track it? Or is this that something is not going right with the tagging? And that's a lot of work to go in and make sure that those are correct. And right now, ideally, you started your migration a year ago or something like that, especially if you're a big company and you've been spending the last few months and will be spending the next few months just continuing to take inventory of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think running both these versions in parallel and making sure that you're comfortable with the delta, and then you could probably, once UA goes away, you could kind of extrapolate your data backwards and get year-over-year comparisons just to keep your sanity. Yeah, it's a lot of work, and yeah, if you've not started your migration, definitely reach out to MaryBeth. She can help you out.
Yeah, we have a few slots left. I'll say that's the other warning that I have is like that all of the agencies that do this are going to be really heavy hit. We do have some, as of recording this on May 3rd, I don't know when it's going to get published. We do have some slots available and we're always happy to help and we won't shame you too much. But it's definitely something where like, if you don't have the resources in house, it's like, we're almost getting to the point where we won't bother dual tagging. But what we do, I think it's an important call out, is almost no one on Google Analytics has like a data dictionary, right? Mm-hmm. So operating a data dictionary is a list of all the tags that you have, all the properties, what they do. And so what we're finding we always have to do is go in and create that data dictionary first. So even if you don't dual tag, because otherwise we don't really know what tags we need to make in Google Analytics for. So that's something that is just something that you're going to have to do. And it's a great way to work once you have that put together too.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also there are some differences like we don't have segments anymore in GA4. I use segments all the time to kind of just slap that in there, and then I've got all the filters ready. So can you explain us what segments were and what are we losing?
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's like some slight ways. There's some ways that we're doing it, but it's not as nice in some ways. So segments and segmentation is when you create a subset of the data to do, and primarily the way I use it is to do comparisons. So in Google Analytics Universal, you could make, one of my favorites is a purchaser versus someone who abandoned cart or someone who's a non-purchaser. And what you were able to do is that Google Analytics had a lot of static reports where you could then look at those two segments or those two groups of behavioral, the behaviors or people, et cetera, and compare them and say, okay, well, with my people who didn't make a purchase, I can see that the bounce rate is a lot higher and they came from these different sources. So what are we doing with those sources? Like, what do we need to improve? And so, now they're changing and it's not quite as easy to do that side-by-side comparison. Like you can add and filter, et cetera, but it's not, at least right now, we'll see how they end up changing it. Cause every day I log into Google Analytics 4, I swear that they've changed something else. But it's definitely going to be like a slightly different way of looking at it. And I'm curious, like what it's going to look like. Like I said, I'm familiar with Adobe Analytics and they have a similar interface and they've found a way to do that. But it's going to be really interesting to see how they address that because that's a core function of Google Analytics.
Yeah, for sure. And also in our company, the way that we are doing kind of overcoming some of those is we're actually using their API through Google BigQuery to export all the data into our warehouse, Snowflake, or any other database. And then you could kind of build your own segmentation and reporting outside of GA's interface. One of the advantages to doing that is you can mash your GA data with your internal data or third-party data. So it gives you a lot more flexibility, but then it's a lot more investment in infrastructure and all that. But depending on what phase the company is in. There are multiple options, and it can be a lot, but it's super interesting for anybody that likes data and marketing and everything.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's another good call out really about GA4 is that at least the way that they're currently explaining it'll work, you do kind of need to use BigQuery. And what that means is, yes, there's a lot of infrastructure and everything, and then you need somebody who knows SQL. And BigQuery's weird version of SQL too. That's a whole other thing where some companies may have been relying on analysts that come from a less like, and this is not a bad thing, by the way, like a less technical background where they're really good contextual analysts and business analysts, but they didn't need to use SQL before. So now we're going into this place where to get the full usage out of your data that you were before with Google Analytics, you kind of need to consider whether you're going to upskill somebody, bring new talent in, etc.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to consider, and it's thrown on companies, and they never asked for it, but here we are.
Yeah, we'll see. I think it's a pretty interesting play, but I can't really comment on like whatever the master plan is for Google. So I'm always interested to see what their next move will be.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great tool that they offer for free, so I can't complain too much. But definitely something that July 1st deadline, so make sure you got your stuff in place. Awesome. So I know there are a few things when it comes to metrics and optimization. In the digital marketing space, A/B testing and optimizations are super important. One of the things that we talked about initially, once you have your infrastructure, you need to have adoption. One of the things that help with adoption and also with the feedback is how you measure your tests or what you're doing. So, what are some of your thoughts on measuring when it comes to measuring the impact of your A/B tests or optimizations that you run?
Oh, this is such a juicy topic. So and this is a really fun one too, because there's been, I would say, a divergence in the A/B testing world. And there's growth marketers, and then there's more statistics focused people. And my philosophy is that we need to try and make tests as scientifically sound as possible. Marketing is already a whole mess, and our data is already a whole mess, and it's not as accurate. And you have to accept a little bit that we're never going to get as accurate as a hard science. But we need to be unrelenting in keeping those elements that make things more sound. So what a few of those are is I think that any test should be pre-tested so that you can calculate how long it should run for you to be able to see an uplift and whether you even have enough traffic to test that particular thing. So sometimes, and this is especially for like small to medium businesses, you want to test on your conversion rate, for example. That's always, not when you get this term conversion rate optimization. But if your conversion rate is only like 1 or 2% and you don't get that much traffic, it's literally impossible for you to see a true statistical uplift during that time. So I think being really honest and strict with that is like element number one. And element number two is to never let a marketer go in and look at that test before it's done running and tell you whether it's winning or not, because you need to wait. So if you pre-test and it says it'll take 7 days for statistical significance, then you wait 7 days, then you look at the results on day 7. And if you look at it and it says there's no difference, then you know that you have rejected your hypothesis. Like it doesn't make a difference. A lot of times what we do instead is say, oh, let's just let it run a little longer. So that's like one core area of it. And then I also think being really cautious about those thresholds too, as much as possible, of like, what do you need to see as an uplift? Because that's a completely another thing. Like, to see if you see a 5% uplift in conversion rate, that can make a really significant difference for your business. And it makes it in some ways a little bit easier because you're like, okay, well, I only need to see a 5% uplift. But for some other metrics, a 5% uplift might be negligible. So you might be wanting to see something more to consider it a winning test. So, those are two elements. I think the other part that gets a little bit more sticky, and I've seen it done a ton of different ways, is how you calculate out the diminishing returns of operationalizing a test. And I know that sounded like a lot of really big, complicated words, but what that means is, okay, you run a test on your website, it wins, you maybe even like do some other confirmations, and you're really clear, like whatever feature we added is a value add to the site. Then you have to go through development and get that put into place. And then you need to evaluate, well, how much impact did that really make? And it's such a fun thing because it's not a perfectly controlled test anymore. And like I said, I've seen it done a lot of different ways. I've seen people play around with modeling like a diminishing return so that like they'll get that perceived uplift over a few months and then it starts to trickle down. So there's been some kind of advanced models like that. Some people just make a guess of like a flat number. So that's where like very interested to hear like your listeners if they have any opinions of how they've seen it done that they really like it. But I think those are some of the core elements that need to go into testing that make a big difference in the quality of what you're running.
There's a lot to unpack in your answer. There was a lot of super useful nuggets. If I made some notes as you were talking, be scientific in your approach. Test needs to be pre-tested. So you define what your tests need to be and then kind of get a gut check for it. And you touched on volume and, having some statistically significant volume. If you don't have a decent enough volume, there's no way you could run a scientific test on it. Also, one of the key points that you said was this is more behavioral. You need to let the test run its course and not, meddle with the lever as soon as you see something. Don't be jittery. Don't react to anything that you see on day one, day two. You got to run its course. And especially with marketing, and especially if you're doing paid media and everything, it's not just what you're doing. It's also the algorithms of, Google and the social media platforms that need to learn what you're trying to do and then adapt. And so it takes a course of couple of weeks to even some months, in depending on how complex the models are. I've seen this so many times that there's competing interests. One is everybody understands intuitively that we need to wait, but there's always a board meeting coming up, or there's a month-end reporting that you start off with a sane mind, and then all of a sudden it's end of the month. You've got to push on your paid media spend to bump up the production. So it's a lot of it takes a lot of patience and courage in a lot of ways to keep that going. So yeah, that was a great answer. A lot to unpack there. You also talked about diminishing returns and ROIs. There will be a certain point that a successful test will no longer give you the same ROI, or even if you keep tuning it up, it'll stop at one point. So you don't get attached to success too much. So yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you. What are some of the key things to measure when it comes to Google Analytics? And so you talked about funnel metrics a little bit. What are funnel metrics, and what are some of the key metrics that we want to measure when it comes to websites? We'll just stick to website for now because that's a loaded question.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with what are funnel metrics. So especially on any sort of It's any site that you have a goal in mind that you want a visitor to do. But we can operate with like e-commerce as an example because it's kind of the core one we usually think about. There's a funnel is any time that someone's taking several different steps on a site and you're watching what those drop-offs are between your key steps. Most traditionally, we think about like a shopping funnel. So somebody landing on a certain page, going into your category pages. So that's like where you have the long list of items, clicking into products, and then adding to cart. And then there's checkout funnels that get really detailed into the different steps that you have. So once someone's in the cart and then they start your checkout process, where are there any certain spots where you are seeing a drop off that you don't expect? There's always going to be leakage in any sort of funnel, but those, and the funnels can be broader than that too. Maybe there's other actions that you want people to take, or that they take in a certain order, and you want to evaluate how each of those steps are going and whether you're expecting the kind of leakage that you see or not. And like when it comes to what to measure, what metrics to measure, there's both kind of some core metrics that I think are important for any sort of website-based business to look at. And then there's the whole conversation about KPIs. And I think that a lot of people interchangeably use those two terms, but to me, they're very different. And a KPI is like, there's only a few of them that you should have as a business, and they are the things that you are completely informing your strategy on. And generally, I like to do them in a pairing. I can't take credit for that. That's an Avinash thing. But what I would say some key metrics are is, which this one's changing. So right now it's bounce rate, but it's going to turn into engagement rate. But what you're trying to understand from this metric is it's kind of like the ewe gross principle. So does someone go to your site and go, ugh, this isn't for me, and immediately leave? And you want to see whether that number is where you expect it to be. There's always going to be some people that go hit a site and then leave immediately. But that's one that's like a great health gauge of pretty much any type of website. If you have a really, really high bounce rate, then you might be running into some issues where your site's not loading fast enough. Something about the content when first people come isn't what they were expecting. So that's one of the core ones. Some other ones that are they're like on the opposite side of the funnel are obviously transactions. Conversion rate, we've already talked a lot about. The universal analytics definition is sessions by transactions. So you're looking at the ratio that, the number of sessions that are happening, how many transactions are there. And then before that is add to cart. Add to cart is a really core one for e-commerce websites because it's like an intent to buy, but it's still pretty far away from actually purchasing. E-commerce sites and consumers currently can tend to use your add to cart as like a wish list, but it's one of the first intents to purchase that's a little more serious than just browsing products. So I think that those are some of the broad ones, but like what one you focus on improving is really specific to what your goals are as a business.
That makes a lot of sense. There's so many things that you could focus on, but you got to define your pathway and then start measuring from there on. And also for some of the most advanced companies with advanced infrastructure, they also combines some of the marketing data within their own internal data and other third-party data. You can match your data from Google Analytics with your paid media and also your customer care, your email metrics, and a bunch of different things, which is where I start geeking out. In my mind, there are kind of three levels. You have your campaign metrics for any measurement, and then you've got your engagement metrics, which is campaign metrics are what is the campaign doing, how many visits, how many add to cart, and all that. Engagement is after your customer purchases, what do they do? Do they use your product? How many times do they use your product? How well or how many products do they use and all that? And then you have performance metrics. which ties to the KPIs that you talked about. Performance metrics, in my mind, kind of are aligned with your company goals, your company's goals. It could be acquisitions goals, retention goals, and stuff like that. What are some of your thoughts on it? And um, are companies doing it this way, or is it just a few companies that thinking in these terms?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's really important to distinguish them. It doesn't really matter how you're going to slice it. I think there's definitely a few different practices. I like that one. It is like just getting that distinguishing factor between this is something that is measured for this reason. Here's who looks at it, and then all the way up to like this is like what we're being judged on for our bonuses, and for the board of directors is looking at these numbers. So I've seen it done quite a few different ways. I've also seen it done really divided by, and this is one of the ways that I divide it in a governance thing. I wrote a governance article recently about this, like who is looking at the metrics and analyzing it. So like your definition that like performance would be like board of directors, C-level directors are looking at it. And then there's some like really tactical metrics that an analyst is going to look at. I've also seen people talk about when they need to be evaluated, like how often. There's some of those metrics that really can, like even the evaluation of them should be automated. And like that's really an opportunity for like optimizing them using machine learning or things like that. Those are ones that you don't really want to waste an analyst's time on a day-to-day basis. And then there's like another bucket that's things that need to be evaluated weekly or monthly or really monitored, and then so on and so forth. There might be something that's like really worthwhile for like a deep dive analysis once a year. So that's like there's so many different ways to slice it, which is not like I'm not like here's an easy framework. But and to answer that second part about like, do I see companies using this? The answer is kind of yes and no. I see a lot of companies misusing some of these, and really the biggest frustration or pain point I see is especially on the leadership level, misinterpreting a metric to a KPI. And they say, we have this KPI dashboard, you want to see it? And it has like 300 different metrics on it. I'm like, none of these are KPIs because you don't know, there's like some little cartoon about it that says like a dashboard like that. And they're like, what is this one trending down? And it says, it's our understanding of all of these metrics. So, I think that's like the pain point there is that I think that there's differing levels of maturity about understanding some of these things. And all companies are in different places, even like in the same industry. But that's the one where I see the most frequent misunderstanding. I see very few companies focusing down their KPIs properly by company-wide, function-wide, et cetera, to really focus people's efforts.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, what you said kind of reminded me of another framework that one of my mentors talked about. You have your stuff that your executives look at, and then your managers look at, and then your technical teams look at. They're different metrics, and you have to treat them differently. And then, like you said, the time horizons that they need to be looked at is different from each other. That's a good point to remember. That and also like with this podcast, we're trying to make it more accessible. This is more advanced, and we don't really. Not every company really needs, all the infrastructure and need to be measuring everything in order to be successful. You can start with marketing. You can start with the funnel metrics you talked about, and then slowly develop and grow into the other KPIs and performance metrics that we touched on.
Yeah, definitely. I think that sometimes people think that they have to build it all at once and they have to be flying their rocket ship when they're still kind of like waddling around in their diapers, and like, and there's so much that you can do with just say like the data that you have from your advertising platforms. You can do a lot with just that, or you can do a lot with just customer feedback. And like, I think that's a really good call out that it feels sometimes like everybody has to have their own data lake or data mesh and all these fancy terms and do all these things and have machine learning and AI. And the answer is you don't. Like, all you need to do is to execute on your data better than your competitors. And if your competitors are other small startups, then really what that means is you're leveraging market intelligence a little bit smarter, and you're looking at your forecasting a little bit smarter. Yes, even really small companies can be doing really smart forecasting to make it a little bit more sustainable, to have the right amount of inventory, to predict where they're going to be in a year. So there's things like that really you don't need that much data to do. You just need the right people thinking about it the right way.
Absolutely. And you also touched on misinterpreting metrics. That's something that I've got a lot of thoughts on. But there's like there are two types of extremes. People who already have a story, and then they just look at the data just to confirm, or look at data with a lens that they already have. So no matter what the data says, they have the same story. I call them wisdom analytics. Versus on the other side, executives could be too jittery and look at a data set and a result and just change everything that they've been doing, change the entire course of action. So I think it's definitely a balance. And like you said, you got to have a right frame of mind. To right people looking at the data is with the right frame of mind is super important.
Oh yeah. It's I think it goes back to that, like, feeling confident and good about data as part of it, but then also, like, creating a culture, whatever you decide, it doesn't have to be the same at every company, that's like, we will look at this honestly and be realistic. And then also having people who can really temper something scary for executives. Because I think that's something that's sometimes missing, is that we go in and we start to be like, we're going to be data driven. We're going to do so much with data. And then you start giving a lot of information to executives that aren't familiar with it. And it stresses them out because no one is being that translator between an analyst who's going to look at it super objectively or like really clinically to the executive, where they're like, what does this mean? And they're jumping to conclusions, where if they have like a data leader who can be like, well, here's kind of the nuances to this. Here's where you need to make a decision.
Yeah, that is so much important, and that's something you talk about, and I'm super passionate about too. Like, I've started to write in my blogs. Like, the storytelling aspect to data is super key, and you got to have a contextual understanding of what the data is telling you, because this same result or same set of data, 10 people can see it and interpret it 10 different ways. But no, you really have to have somebody who understands the product, the company, and then the data as well to tie it all together, and not just an analyst looking at objective analysis of the data. Super helpful. I think that kind of is a good segue into our topic on leadership. At InsightLime Analytics, I know you cover all aspects of data, infrastructure, marketing, and even results and measurements and everything. How do you assess what stage a client is at, and what your work is going to be? Well, when you go in, how do you assess?
That's a good question. I think there's a few different things. One that we're currently actually working on to be even more measurable in that is creating a data maturity model. So there's a few digital maturity models out there, but there's not as many like super focused on data. So that's one thing that's like to come soon. So I'm kind of like letting the cat out of the bag about that. But as experienced people in this field, it's something that like myself and like the other senior analysts can see right away. there's like a few key aspects that indicate where someone's at. And so that's part of it's coming from experience now, where I kind of know, depending on even what a company is approaching us with, where they're probably going to be at in their maturity. And then we start to get a little bit more into the details as we get there. Of course, you don't want to make any like snap judgments of like, wow, this company is really immature or really mature. But there's some indicators depending on like, well, what are they valuing right now? Like, what's really important to them? What are they super focused on? And then there's also sometimes where we go into this a lot deeper, which is we'll conduct an entire data strategy project where we're going in and mapping out their marketing and data tech stack, and comparing that to what we consider industry standard. And we're evaluating like their whole team structure and doing some needs assessments of like, okay, well, they're here and they need this, but they don't have it yet. And so that's like the really comprehensive way that we dig into it, especially with like bigger, complex organizations. And that's where we get like a lot of information and are able to like hold up the mirror for an organization and say, well, this is what we see as far as where you're at. But so we have some pretty detailed ways to do it. And then there's also like these initial, what is someone asking us for? There's a very big difference between a company that's asking for just like conversion rate optimization for their site. Hey, we really want to get more sales and we want to lift our conversion rate and make way more money. That's a very different level of maturity than someone who's coming to us and being like, we already have unified customer records and we really want to do some cool stuff with that. We want to start doing like machine learning and we want to apply that to our advertising. Those are two very different conversations, and there's nothing wrong with either of them, but it is a big indicator of how mature they are.
Absolutely. And it's super important for us as data experts and marketing experts to go in with an open mind. You touched on that. You don't want to shame anybody for where they are. And everybody goes through the same process. People are at different phases and different points in time. So I think, definitely keeping an open mind and understanding where they're at is super key. And also from a data perspective, you did touch on this, like you have companies running reports off of Excel sheets, that's one end. And then you go into having a marketing infrastructure in place, data infrastructure in place, where you can get some of those funnel metrics. And also next, you could probably look at BI and automating reports with visualizations. So at this stage, you can talk about looking at historical data and understanding patterns. Hey, what's my seasonality of the sales or retention or stuff like that? So pattern recognition. This is where I think, in my opinion, is the biggest ROI, because running reports off of Excel or just looking at one or two metrics wouldn't give you a larger perspective of to be able to get those patterns, recognize those patterns. So BI and visualization is super helpful at that point. And then you go into predictive. So until now you looked at historical data. Now you can start building models to predict what will happen in the future based off of what has happened in the past. And then you also have these other phases where you have machine learning models, you've got your data science and AI models. So there's various phases to data maturity. So that's super key and super important.
Certainly, and I think for people who are listening too, it's it never happens just quite that linearly too. So yes. That's a good call out. Like I've known companies that I would think are fairly mature. They're starting to do some predictive stuff and they're getting playful with that, and they still have like a few Excel sheets they're using to like report to executives. So there's one thing there, but also would agree with you that that's where like advanced like data science kind of stuff starts to have a good ROI is always predict. I'm always going to say do predictive stuff. and do predictive stuff that really influences the business if you're not predicting. And you can do some lighter versions before you even get there. Like you should be forecasting. Even if you're still in Excel, you should be forecasting. But the getting to the juiciness of churn prediction or things like that is really where you can highlight issues before they happen and take advantage of opportunities before they happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also, yeah, you have to be understanding of where you are, and not everybody has to do everything, but you have to just know where you are. And also, one of the things that you talk about a lot is be customer-centric. Even if you're working in a corporate environment, look at the business needs and then develop a solution, and not have a solution in place just because you know how to do it. Then there's no use for it. If the marketing team is not ready for it, then you can't really. I mean, I can't build a CDP solution if the marketing team is still not ready to use event-based, data and event-based marketing yet. If they are just sending out onboarding and retention emails, and you're talking about, engaging customer where they are, and, looking at the different pages of the app that they're looking at, and changing changing what you show based off of that. So basically, event-based. It's also, you got to have customer in mind before developing solutions. Sorry, that was a long-winded thing, but yeah, definitely keep your customers in mind and before developing a solution. Cool. We talked about infrastructure and data maturity. How do you handle data adoption and literacy with your clients?
Yeah. With difficulty. No, just kidding. It's a long game, and those two things can be their own whole project strategic function of your company, and it does take some time. And that's one of the reasons I really love when we have these opportunities to stay in a company for years and really help them develop this. But there's the two aspects. One, like you said, data literacy is something where I'll define the term really quickly too, because it sounds kind of sometimes I feel like people could be like, well, that's insulting. I know how to look at data or whatever. And then also it sounds fancy at the same time of it's another term like strategy, right, or synergy or something like that. But what it really means is do people understand the data that your company creates? Do they feel comfortable reading it when it's presented to them in a deck? And do they trust it? And do they feel comfortable using what's coming out of their team to justify what they're doing? And so that can have a lot to unpack there, right? Because you need to evaluate first, what level of data literacy does everyone need? How will you train them? Because it's something that does require some training. And then the other parts of it, like I said, trust in data and understanding of what you collect and why, kind of bleeds into the second part, which is about communication and adoption of data. I think that communication of data quality and governance, everything like that, is something that should be operating at the highest level of the company. If possible, owned by a whole group, like governance, for example, governance and maybe communications tied together, actually, because it's where things can fall apart, and also where you can get the strongest message. So this is something that if someone wanted to take a script and do best practice, that's what you would do, because without it, you have a really common scenario, which is that there's often conflicts between departments, and data is used more as a weapon than it is as a tool to get to understand each other better and your customer better, which is super unfortunate. And one of the ways that you get around that is by building a culture where you, and common agreement about all the data. So you're making sure that you're really evaluating, like, what is our source of truth? How does everybody use that? What are the agreed upon terms we use as a company? And how do we validate that and make sure that whatever we're communicating all lines up to it? And that's so much easier to do at a really high executive level, and then get buy-in and like communicate it over time. And all of that I'm saying, it takes years to develop properly. So like I like summarized it and said, that's all you got to do. Ta-da! Like now you have this great company and everybody loves each other and there's no fighting between your IT team and your analytics team. That's not necessarily the truth, but it's something where it's like an iterative process of evaluating where do we have gaps. And one trick would be wherever you see conflict, like frustration, you hear a repeated term like I don't trust that data, that's where you can dig in to really understand what's going on.
Yeah, that's super important. Yeah, definitely top down approach is a better way to go. And also you kind of identify the pain points and areas of pain points, and then dig into it to understand how you can get better adoption, solve some of these data quality issues or data issues to get better adoption. Awesome. So we talked a bunch about data. Your main role as a founder of your company is to lead your team, and you talked about a lot about working with the clients and everything. When it comes to managing the team, I think I believe you said you run a 6-member team. That's you're a couple years old, right? As a company, so that's a good size. Is your team remote, or do you have a hybrid model? You're in Colorado, correct?
Yeah, we like to say we're a remote first company, but we actually do have a headquarters in Durango, Colorado, and we have 4 of us out of the office fairly regularly, but it's entirely up to each employee. We have some that are, we've actually had some shifts recently, but we had quite a few in Texas, and now pretty much all of it's moving to Colorado, which is interesting. And that's not on purpose or anything. It's just kind of how it's happened. But that's the model, is that, there's some of us that like to come into the office and live here. But also it's not necessarily like a major metro. So I don't have any expectations for people to relocate or anything like that. And then we get together at least once a year, as long as everyone wants to. If someone said, nah, I just don't feel like doing that, we wouldn't hold it against them. And then we do a little bit of travel to our clients when it's really necessary and they really want us to. But we started the company in 2020. So really at like the start of everything going remote for work. And it seems like it's a model that really works well for our team.
Yeah, definitely for startups, and especially in data and marketing and some of these areas, remote work is definitely feasible, and also it works really well. How do you handle onboarding and building team culture and all that when people are scattered around the country and the globe?
It's definitely a bit more difficult than when you could just get someone in the office and have them meet everyone in person. There's a few different things we do. We do actually try our best to have people's first week start in the office. So we'll fly them to Durango. And so far we've done that with everyone, and that's been a really good kind of start. That doesn't mean that everyone else is going to also be at the office at the same time now that we're getting a bit bigger, but it does give them a little bit of time to meet with their manager and really get to know the company. And then, the other parts of the culture is, I think, something that's really key when you're doing a remote first company is to intentionally create a culture. So we've done several iterations. We work with a business coach that also helps us with this, but we really look at like, well, what are we now? What do we value? What do we have or what are we currently doing that we don't like, and we want to stop doing. And so we really have intentionally decided that. And I think that it's always going to be colored by who the founder is, but I'd like to think as it gets bigger, it moves away much less from just like who I am as a person, and it becomes a bit more of like who we all are as a person. But I think that's part of it. Was like I had some core elements that I wanted. I wanted, people who are interested in leadership and analytics, and so that's like a core function of our culture. We also wanted people who were really focused on radical candor, is like the fancy term for it, but like transparency, being really open with each other, and people who really love what they do and like are interested in it. And like those are kind of the three of the core pillars that we built the business on. And I think we look for that when we're hiring, and we also look for people who are going to be a culture add. And then it's kind of like up to everyone else, like how that's been created since then. Like there's a lot of things where it's like, I realize now it's like a living, breathing thing. And I see things that are part of our culture now that like I never intended, that I really like. And but there, I think starting with that intentionality really helped.
That's awesome. Yeah, me having some goals in mind about the culture will definitely help, and to help in one expanding that culture, and also in hiring. You want to see that people coming in are a good fit to the team that you already have. That's super cool. I know you've worked some in the corporate world, and also you've got your own run your own business now. What are some of the pros and cons of the corporate world?
Ooh, I was hoping you would ask me this question. And I talk about this a lot. And I'll also answer it in the vein of like the difference between consulting too and being in-house. The pros of being in corporate is that there is a lot of upward mobility and possibility in the same company. So if you really love a company, you have a lot of different places you can go. And you can learn a lot about politics. And I know that a lot of people think about that word and they're like, oh, I don't want to do company politics. But this is a hard truth. As you get higher up in a company, if that's really what you want to do, you have to play the game. And you can play it in an honest way and really be using it correctly, but you have to be advocating for yourself and your team, et cetera. And you can't really learn that as well when you're either a consultant or working at a really small company. It's just a different dynamic. Some other benefits is that you get a lot more budget to play with. And you get to see things through to the end. So like if you're a consultant, you pop in, you make your recommendations, and you just hope that they'll take some of them. But in-house, you really get to see long-term following through of projects, getting that satisfaction of seeing the results, and learning from things that don't go well. Cons would be kind of almost the flip side of some of those things. If you are someone who really wants to be entrepreneurial, it's possible to be entrepreneurial in a company, but it really depends on the company and how they receive that. As someone who has always been that way, it's been received well sometimes and sometimes not so much. And so it can be something where it causes friction if you're someone who's really innovative in your ideas. And over time, that can get stifled, is what happens. If you do choose to stay in corporate, you can start to get a little bit comfortable. The other thing with corporate is if you stay in the same company for a long time, you don't get to see as many different ways of doing things. If you're a consultant, or if you maybe change or switch between corporate and smaller companies, you're going to see a lot of different personalities and like different industries and completely different ways of operating. And all of that can add color to your experience moving forward. So I could probably go on, but I think those are some of the really core elements between the differences. And what I've found is I really like working as a consultant for corporate companies, because I still get to enjoy a lot of those pros that I really like. But then also people are a little more accepting of whatever wild ideas I'm coming in with, because they're like, she's just a consultant. So that's at least where I found my sweet spot. But I think it really depends on the person.
Yeah, it really depends on the person and the company that you're in, like you said. You touched on a couple of things that were interesting to me. I mean, the politics can be either pro or a con depending on how you play it, or also how you don't like it. Um, it the way that I think about it is it's just dealing with people, and in the corporate world, you deal with the same people for a long period of time. So you got to have that long term mindset. Hey, if you have a couple of projects, you lose some, you win some. But when you're in the consulting world, it's more about the customer's needs first, and you gotta make sure that they're comfortable with everything. And also, you touched on people who are entrepreneurial. How could they manage in a corporate world? One of the things is, yeah, like you said, depends on the company. One of the things is smaller companies are usually open to give you more flexibility versus big tech or really large companies. Most of the times they fit you in a box, and then your role is defined. You do it, and it's unless you move to a different role, you can't do too much about it. Um, right. Following up on our previous question, what can startups and corporations learn from each other?
Another one that I think is really fun to think about. I think that startups can learn how to stick to a set strategy, and stick to a strategy from corporate companies. Uh, I think that that's a key element of startups that are more successful, is if they're able to get at least a bit close to the level at which some of these really big corporations are able to choose a strategy and really structure everything they do based on it. That's something that startups can certainly learn from corporate. I think that corporate can learn from startups that even though they have this whole established way of doing things, sometimes you can blow that up, and you should listen to people who have unique ideas and challenge the status quo. And that's where you're going to be able to innovate compared to competitors and be a lot more flexible. And that's one thing that you see with corporate, like right now. I mean, we even see it in the kind of closing and Bed Bath and Beyond struggling, for example. Companies that fail to get excited about whatever is happening in the world and in the business world, and play around with it, and try new things, even if they're still executing within their strategy, are the ones that succeed. And ones that really don't adapt fast enough are going to fail. And startups know that. Startups always know that they need to be agile, and that's how they outcompete corporate companies sometimes too, is that they're more willing to go big into something new, and they can pivot really quickly. So I think that those are some of the core areas that can really help. And I think the other part that you kind of touched on a bit that I'd like to pull into is even though corporate wants to have their boxes for every one of their employees, allowing for some and I forget the term, maybe we can post it in your podcast notes if you remember it, but it's when you're an entrepreneur within a company. And I think that you should encourage that.
Yeah.
Intrapreneur, you're right. Yes, thank you. So you should encourage some entrepreneurial activities, whether you have innovation functional groups and things like that. That's something that you don't want to lose the fun and creativity of that, even if you need a lot of structure in your company.
Yeah, no, that's a really good answer. Yeah, both sides can learn, a lot from each other, and it's depending on where you are as an individual, you could choose one or the other, or switch between the two. Awesome. Let's dive into some of the challenges in general. What are some of the challenges you face in the digital marketing world? We know we talked about GA4 and all that. So what are some of the other challenges, or if you want to expand on GA4, that's cool too.
Well, I'll answer kind of more focused on digital marketing, since that's how you phrased it too. I think some other challenges are how to properly show impact and understand what's working and what's not is like one of the biggest pain points of marketing ever. It's not specific just to digital marketing, but with digital marketing, it actually makes it almost harder and more frustrating in some ways because we think that we know a lot more about how the uplift is and what it's doing for us, but it can really misguide us. So that's a huge pain point, is that like with attribution, which I still think is important and we need to figure out how we do it. But the way that attribution has been, it's so hard to discern. We're like rewarding digital marketing over a lot of other things. So, digital marketing, we just take the whole pie and we say that digital marketing has gotten all of these slices for like where all of our traffic came from. But if you think about the big picture, that's not true at all. There's returning customers. There's like your brand presence. There's all of the traditional marketing that you're doing. You're not actually factoring for any of that when you look at that pie chart in Google Analytics. So that's one that is really difficult, and it's really difficult to properly explain to marketers. One of them you touched on at the beginning of this was about deprecation of cookies and additional privacy restrictions and laws that are going into place. This is something that is difficult because we become accustomed in digital marketing to operating in a certain way. And the industry is really flexible, so I think that they always will adjust. But now what it does is forces companies to be more strategic about how they collect data. They can't just collect whatever they want and use it however they want and store it however they want anymore. Now there's laws holding them accountable. And then also they have to be a lot more intentional about gathering the data that they want. It's not just going to fall into your lap. If you really want to know about your customers, you're going to have to ask them. And convincing companies to do that is another one that's difficult, where it's like, hey, if you want zero-party, first-party data, this is what has to happen. And it's a little more complicated than it has been in the last 5 or so years.
Yeah, it can definitely get a little more infrastructure heavy. You want to be able to allow the infrastructure to, say, delete data upon request, or build some of a more sophisticated tagging mechanism so that you understand where what part of your funnel you're tracking and all that. So it definitely is evolving as we speak. So it's a interesting time to be in the industry. What are some of the challenges in the consulting world?
There's a lot. I think finding clients is always going to be a difficult thing. Finding the right clients that like what you do is like when you first start out in consulting and first establish yourself as an agency. It's like it can feel like an overwhelming task, and I think so. That's like kind of more of a tactical one. But I think another one that's really relevant to what we're talking about is like balancing recommendation, understanding that you don't have the wealth of knowledge that someone in-house does. So there's like pros and cons to that, right? Like part of it is that you can see things they can't. And on the other side, you don't know all of the reasons why they are the way they are. And so being a good consultant and really supporting your clients is actually a really fun for me. I think I don't know if everyone would agree, but it's really fun but it's also very challenging because you're always trying to be like, well, I want to recommend things, but I want to make sure that I have enough context to do so. And then you also have to let go of any ownership of what happens next because might not be there. And even if you're going to be there, like sometimes we're running data strategy projects or implementation, we can still only do so much. We can create the project plan. We can highlight any pitfalls. We can really try and drive things forward. But in the end, it's the company's kind of responsibility and choice to like how they're going to do that. So I think that's like something that's always really challenging, is to not get overly invested or feel frustrated when someone isn't taking your recommendation. But I also have been told by someone else who's really experienced within consulting that you definitely don't want them to follow 100% of your recommendations, because then you're 100% responsible for what happens. So it's just like hoping that they take the pieces that are going to be most useful to them, and that'll make a difference for them.
Yeah, no, you touched on a really some really important points there. Consulting versus in-house. You definitely, as a consultant, you don't want to be arrogant going in saying, "Hey, I'm a consultant. I know what I'm talking about." Yes, you do know your area of expertise, but you don't have a lot of times you don't have the contextual knowledge on why things are the way they are. And also, we touched on this in the earlier in the podcast, but a lot of times the data does not give you the entire picture. There's a lot of history and stories behind why operations are operating the way they are. So it's really collaborating with clients to understand as much context as you can is super helpful, and also letting go of ownership. I love that, because if you're an in-house employee of a company, then you can own a certain piece of the business for a long time. But as a consultant, you build it and you hand it over, and you're more like a parent needs to let go. Yeah, really cool. What are some of the criticisms you have from the marketing side about data teams, and what can we do to improve? We can take a jab or two. Give it to us.
Yeah, I guess my first jab is that they're not big enough often. And I guess maybe that's a jab at leadership instead. So I'll have some specific jabs at data teams as well. But like, we spend too much money on tools and not enough money on smart people. I think another jab is that we sometimes focus too much on super technical data scientist type people. And that's really a trend right now, is that data scientists sound sexier than an analyst, but they're both valuable. And if you're a smaller company and you had to pick one, I would pick an analyst any day, because you need people who understand both parts of, or multiple parts of a business. You need someone who can speak the language of IT or really understand a marketer when they're talking about a brand concept. Because, like what you just said, there's so much additional context that needs to be layered with the data. And so I guess my next punch would be that oftentimes on larger organizations, I don't think that I see enough leadership roles with data. Like, I think that a chief data officer needs to become just kind of like a standard part of the C-suite. And I don't see that. And I also don't see that many, director level and above people advocating for it. I don't see enough hunger in our current data teams to do that. I think that we sometimes, and here's my kick now, is like that we act like order takers where we should be the ones driving the conversations instead. I think those are some of the ones. I mean, I'm sure I could keep going, but I think those are some of the most important ones that are on my mind today.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely data teams need to be more proactive. And because we see a lot of data from a lot of different angles, we have different perspective than, somebody that's in operations and in the business end, who has developed certain blind spots for those. Data teams can definitely, like you said, data leadership needs to become more obvious. Chief data officers and VP, senior vice presidents, executives at the data level, who can tell a good story and be a bridge between the business and the back-end teams. It's really important. You made a great point on companies hiring data science folks, because it's way more sexier. And yeah, that's so true. Because you we talked about data maturity. So you have to get to that level of data maturity to start hiring data scientists. So you definitely need to have analysts first. And then if you want to build out your infrastructure, go hire data engineers first
Yeah.
to make sure that you build out the infrastructure, because 80%, or I won't say 80%, but 60 to 70% of the job is to get data from different places, massage it in a way that they can work well together, and then present it in a way for analysis and model building.
Yep.
So that's all that the data engineers do. And then you hire a data scientist or machine learning engineers. So it's really about data maturity. But you're spot on when you say, a new executive comes in and he's like, hey, why don't we hire data scientists, PhDs and all that. But they don't have what they need to, be good at their jobs. You're setting them for failure.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think also, we misunderstand, maybe this goes back to data literacy a bit, the difference between a data scientist and an analyst. And I think sometimes they hire a data scientist and then they expect them to do an analyst's job. And this PhD is like, look, like, that's not what I do. And they're like, well, why won't you just pull these metrics for me? Like it's, and so, yeah, it's another one where, I don't know if it's maybe like a branding issue of us, of our different roles or something like that. But a lot of times I've seen like a job description where they're like, the title says data scientist and I read it, I'm like, you just want an analyst. Or, they also, or sometimes they even have the description correct. And then that's not what they ask the person to do at all.
Exactly. Speaking of, kind of moving towards digital marketing again. Digital data can never be perfect. We talked about, regulations coming in place and all that. Even without that, there's always gaps. In a lot of people's minds, digital marketing data is infinite and you have everything you need, but it's not the case. There's a lot of gaps. I could hop on the website and then leave the session and go on my mobile phone and log in. So it's really hard to tie those two together and understand that I'm the same person. And also, it usually is directionally correct. So how do you handle those situations? How do you explain those to your clients and executives?
That's one where that like communication and data literacy comes in again. It's one of the first initiatives I almost always pick up with a new company is saying, all right, well, let's like for real evaluate what our discrepancies are. Let me show you what the industry averages are too. And let's have some common language about why that's actually okay. Because the average discrepancy between, for example, Google Analytics, like transaction revenue data and your backend is usually like 20%. That's like a normal number. And sometimes people hear those numbers, or also this is like where these conversations are like issues and like conflict comes up as someone goes, well, I can't trust Google Analytics data because it's 20% different than the financial data. And the financial analysts are like, how dare you use that data to interpret anything? It's not accurate. But the thing is, it's usually consistently 20% different. So you actually still have a directional change. If your revenue goes up, it's going to go up in both and it's going to be pretty proportional. So it's like a longer term game. But the first thing that I usually do is create like a one sheet of like, here's where we're at. Here's how we're going to keep being accountable about this. We're going to check it every quarter or something like that. And here's what it really means. And then it continues to be like little pieces that I build on as I present to a client. I'll explain that often and keep going back to the point like, this data is valuable for these reasons. Here's why we should use it. And then I'm also, someone who really understands the other side. I really love working with finance teams, really love working with more advanced like data engineer teams that are really like starting to do some more advanced things that get you a little more closer to like accuracy. So I totally understand where they're coming from and like why they're like that. And I like to also honor when an analysis actually does need to be done in finance data, for example, because there are those differences. And so like starting to educate on that and make sure that we are playing on the same team really helps, because like establishing that agreement really helps. Like sitting down with finance and being like, look, I'm not trying to step on your toes. Here's why I do what I do, and here's where I'm going to focus on. But if it goes into this field, like financial forecasting for the whole company or calculating profitability or like COGS or something like that, I'm going to put that over the fence to you, but we can both benefit from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on it. It's really about setting up expectations. Finance and accounting data is super accurate, and that's what they are paid to do, be accurate. And in the digital world, and a lot of data, customer care or email marketing, all these data is mostly directional, and as long as you have those deviations and expectations set, like you said, I think as long as you're measuring the same set of data the same way over time, you wouldn't know if there's a directional change or a directional shift, and that's when you can make decisions based off of. And I think I heard somebody say it's all okay as long as you're consistently wrong. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I really like that. And it's very true. And I think that sometimes discrepancies, I even have a blog post about it, can be like a paralyzer for actually doing things and an excuse for why you're not doing things. And I would rather have data that I think is good enough. And like good enough is exactly that. It's good enough. And be making a bunch of decisions on it and looking at how that impacts things and driving things forward, and really like having good conversations too about like, hey, what does this mean? How do we want to approach this? Versus like choosing to do nothing, or something I've also seen companies do is go so conservative that they like put all the power into finance or into like an engineering team, where then it takes them so long to do an analysis that it's useless anyways. So, it's really like the business world moves fast. And we have to accept that we know something, but we don't know everything. And, it's better to be imperfect in what you're using than to, just be guessing completely without data.
Yeah, it's really a balance. Like we talked about earlier about being scientific and knowing exactly what you're doing in terms of your hypothesis and testing. But also on the flip side, you don't want to wait too long. You don't want to like wait 6 months to get a result of a test. Like you said, the business world moves so fast that it becomes stale at that point.
That's so true. I'm glad that you called that out, because some people might listen to this and be like, "Oh my God, she just totally contradicted herself." But yeah, it's really, and I think that the way you do that is keep the business focus in mind. It costs me practically nothing to pre-test tests and be strict there. It's so easy. It doesn't add operational complexity or anything like that. But on the other hand, running all of our analysis through a database that only finance has, and you have to ask for it instead of querying it yourself or whatever the issue is, does add operational complexity and makes it harder for you to do your job. So always thinking about like, where's that balance, and what level of control needs to be there, because it also depends a bit on where the data is going, what you're using it for. And those two things do coexist, because you're always wanting to make it as accurate as possible, as make sure your tracking is as clean as possible and the data is clean as possible, but to a point. There's like a point of diminishing returns. You want to get to that good enough point and then just let it go and check it periodically, maintain data quality, and then really push hard into like using that data.
Absolutely. I mean, it always comes down to balance. The business world is so nuanced, and there are a lot of times opposing interests. So you just have to balance, so keep a balance so you don't miss out on opportunities, as well as not take drastic decisions based off of wrong or small set of data, insignificant data.
Right.
It's been a long week, MaryBeth.
It's only Wednesday.
I know.
But I agree.
Cool. All right, let's talk AI and ChatGPT. We're kind of in a revolution right now. I mean, I am invested, but I have a hard time keeping up with everything that's going on. I just hope that it just there's a lot of value to AI and this thing. I don't like this, like all the hype around it. You got to temper that down and make sure you provide value. Like you said, have customers in mind and not just AI for AI. What are your thoughts on current advancements in AI and ChatGPT and everything?
Well, I have to say I laughed because I'm in this group called Restaurant Technology Network where we workshop some things, and we have this game in most of the working sessions of like, how long can we go before someone says something about ChatGPT? So it took us quite a while before we got there, but you're gonna love. I just actually finished writing another article that's going to go on our website about this, but I agree. I think my number one statement is don't believe the hype, but there's some pretty interesting stuff going on. And another thing that I say as someone who's been in the data world for a while is like, well, like some of the ways that people are using the term AI is really just like kind of predictive analytics, and like it's not that cool. Like, so yeah, I think that there's some applications that are going to totally change the world, I hope, in a good way. But I also see like in the business world that it seems like there's a lot of new startups. And, I was just at a conference in Vegas a few months ago and really saw that it was just like people are really like capitalizing on this change. I mean, I saw it a bit, when like cookies started to be deprecated and things like that too. There's a ton of people saying how they're going to still be able to identify your customers all these fancy ways. So like happens every time. But I think for businesses that, might be listening to this, my advice would be, think about what could really impact both your customer and the operations of your company first. Like what will save time of smart people? You don't want it to use it to replace smart people or to replace specific jobs. What you want to do is make it so that those smart people can use even more of their time doing smart stuff. Like data scientists are a perfect example, or like engineers. What if you could use AI to do 80% of the data cleansing and data quality checks that you're currently doing? Like imagine how much more time would be freed up to actually analyze data and actually make business decisions. So, I think that's like where I see is like, and I have these, like my new post is about like the truths of data, like hard truths of AI, and that touches a few of them. It's just like I always see this. We get all excited about stuff in the business world. We get all worked up about it, and sometimes it's a big deal and sometimes it's not. But we're super adaptable, and I think that there's some interesting things, but they're not like they're not really like what I imagined AI would be. If you had told me that AI was going to become a hot topic in 2023, and you asked me that a few years ago, I don't think I would be describing something like ChatGPT, because to me, it's just like the next iteration of Google search. Like, let's be honest, like, yes, it has a lot of things colored into that and it helps you do things and it's really interesting and there's so many applications, but really like, I'm excited for what comes next too. Like what is really like going to be pushing the envelope, because, I think it's kind of like a long time coming, and there's been pieces of it that we've been using for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so some of these large language models are definitely a huge leap in technical advancement, but for the business user, it's more of a more sophisticated chatbot in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And there are these other advancements like Auto GPT, which you don't have to prompt it every time. You just give it a goal and it'll you ask it to book a hotel, and it'll go look at different hotels and look at time slots, and then book a hotel for you and stuff like that. So there's some advancements there, but totally get your point on don't we definitely have to allow it to mature and see where it goes. And also you talked about the hype cycle. A lot of ways. I was at South by Southwest,
Mm-hmm.
and AI was big topic, and last year it was Web3 and crypto. So
Right.
it was like replace Web3 and crypto with AI. That was kind of the theme this year. So I don't want that to happen, that a lot of companies try to capitalize on it, say AI for everything, and then just people lose interest in it, because there's a lot of ways that this is useful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
same
I
with
think,
crypto as well.
yeah, I mean, I guess I'm like less impressed with crypto, but I agree. It's like, it's something where I really do think it's the start of something new that's really going to, and I, at least in my hopes, and maybe I'm a bit idealistic, there's some people who are all doom about it, but I don't really think we're there yet for it to be really doomy. But I have concerns about like bias and models and things like that. But I think there's things like the healthcare system and global warming and things like that that we can really transform the world with this. So I don't want people to lose interest. And so I think it's for people like us continuing the conversation in a really pragmatic way and starting to show like here's the real benefit. Like here's like some tangible ways that make a lot of sense. It's kind of like, same thing with like predictive or prescriptive modeling. It's like something that's so useful. So I'm sure that we'll identify pretty soon like what those are in AI. And then making sure they don't go away because we can see the return on investment. So I'm super excited about that. And I think, like you said, we're just still scratching the surface there, and there's a lot of maturity that will need to develop. But I also think what you're saying about companies, like part of what I'm saying to people is like, please don't hire a C level like chief AI officer right now. Like I think it's a good time to start to understand it, start to asking questions of people in your company already. And if you don't have that chief data officer, or whatever you want to call that, get that person first,
Yeah.
because that's more of like a holistic picture of everything data. And so I think that if people are excited about AI and think that's the direction their company wants to go, and if you think about some of the more advanced, more data mature companies, they do use either like machine learning or just really data driven. Like heard a talk from Stitch Fix at Shop Talk this spring, and like they like their whole, even though they're like an e-commerce business and things like that, they just like have data as a core way they function. So if you want to go that way, like assessing your whole data maturity and taking an honest look at yourself is a good first step, because then you're going to really know what is the right decision when it comes to AI.
No, that's a great point. And I've been thinking about this a lot with a lot of talk about AI and data. What is AI and how is it different from modeling or data science aspects of this thing? So I still have to think more about it, but the way where I am right now is data science is more about extracting intelligence from your existing data, historical data, and maybe predicting what will happen, but based off of what you have. And AI, at least in its current iteration, is more of a productivity tool that you can come and use it as a plugin to improve your or take your productivity to the next level.
I would really agree with that. That's kind of how the way I would also think about it, and had chewed on that a bit myself. So yeah, I would agree. I think it's really like there's ways that we can apply it to make things easier for ourselves. And but it's not necessarily like, I've seen some startups do things like, look, you can use this kind of AI chatbot thing and like ask it questions and it'll answer like it was your analyst, and it'll pull data from like your data sources. And I'm like, like or like the ones where they're like, oh, I'm going to replace your copywriter with AI. I'm like, yeah, like, I think, yes, if you really wanted to, but like, isn't there like, why don't you like make things 100 times more efficient for those different people? And make it so that they can spend even more time answering your business questions and writing good copy versus, some of the other more menial tasks that they need to do.
Yeah. And then this goes back to our previous point on having context around what the data is saying. Without those subject matter experts in there to provide some context or understand some context, these AI models can't really can derive way different interpretations than what it really should be, or what um, the data is actually telling you. Yeah, definitely, you need to have that institutional knowledge for copywriting. You can't just automate it, at least not in this iteration without
Yeah.
training the model. Very cool.
And I'm not just saying that because I don't want to be out of a job.
No, it's like you said, it makes copywriters' job a lot more easier, but it cannot replace copywriters.
Yeah, it's like the creative thing that like, we are using it to kind of generate some art and things like that, but it's not necessarily like ever going to have that same raw energy and like ideas that like a person is going to have.
Yeah, you could. I mean, I'm using ChatGPT to write some of my blogs and stuff like that. The way that I think about it is, if I can't think of any ideas, I'll use it to, give me a head start. If I have an idea and I am like 80% there, I'll use it to kind of fine tune it. So both sides, but it can give you the 20% edge, but you still have to do the 80% of the work that you need to do. Otherwise, I could probably just give a topic to ChatGPT and ask it to write an article, but it'll be so robotic and
Right.
it'll be lacking soul. And,
Yeah. And I think I just saw an article about it, and maybe we can also throw that in your meeting in the podcast notes or whatever. But I saw some other interesting ways where like, I think what I'm considering using it for is, I don't every day get into R scripts and things like that, but you can actually have it really help you build some of that stuff for yourself. And it's like, why not? And there's this one article that I just shared to my team that was about like using a combination of R, ChatGPT, to help you do data quality analysis. And I thought that was like a really interesting way to kind of automate pieces of that, where before we might spend a lot more time tweaking like the code and making sure everything's right and everything's pulling in through, and like it can kind of connect the dots a little bit for you. I haven't read the whole article completely, but it's just like some interesting concepts about how that can make our jobs easier.
Yeah, there's a lot of applications, and different, like you said, different pieces of the workflow, and not replacing the entire workflow. Speaking of which, are you using ChatGPT in any way in your workflow? And if so, how so?
I've played around with it a bit. Like you said, I've also kind of used it like before to be like, just kind of see like, okay, how can it help me write content? And, and then I've started to just like look around at some of those other ideas, like, well, how can we connect it in with like what we're currently doing? And like, maybe we can play with that. I haven't found any like particular workflows that are like now part of my day to day. I've really like dipped my toes in it, really played with the platform, and spent a lot more time like listening to what everyone else is saying about it. I'm super interested in all the discourse about the privacy of it and the IP and like everything like that, and like what everyone's using it for. And I think but I have done like some of those things too that just like make it really quick. Like I forget, I've done some things like make me a recipe or create a plan for me. And like I kind of use it like a little bit of an assistant, and I'm super interested in the idea of like, some of the other ones that can really like iteratively like go figure something out for you. Because that's something that like, right now I'm not, once again, not replacing anyone's job, but it can make things a lot easier. But haven't found my like one thing that's like, okay, every day I have it open. I'm really still in like kind of play around mode.
That makes sense. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of discourse about it, and it's super interesting time to just learn about what's going on. What are some of the cool applications that you would like to see of, say, these large language models?
I mean, I think the one I've mentioned in passing a bit is like things such as improving, and this is something I listened to another podcast recently about creating like simulations. So I think it could be a way to make simulations a little easier. And what's interesting about that, or what is really impactful, would be like thinking about some of the critical things that can save lives, like hospital bed capacity was one of the examples in that podcast. I really want to see us take a look at some of those things, or like maybe traffic congestion, some of these problems that are super hard to solve for, and see if we can make simulations and models that are a little bit easier for us to conceptually see these big problems solved. Like that's something that like simulations already can do, and they can train them really quickly. But I wonder with like these bigger language models and being able to just kind of dump a ton of input into it, like it'd be so cool if you could dump all of that input, like almost like a whole data lake's worth, tell it to cleanse it, normalize metrics, blend everything together, consider all the pitfalls, and then like tell it the business question, and it's able to like model things out for you. I think we're super far away from that right now, but that's where I think it would be super helpful. Because like another thing from that podcast that was really interesting to me was like thinking about how that could explain why we make some hard decisions in politics and in the government and things like that. Is like if you really model it out and say, well, this is like why, it could be really impactful. But really, like anything that's going to like positively impact people's lives is where I really want to see the first one, even though I sit here and I work for-profit companies all the time.
No, that's a great outlook. It definitely can help in a lot of areas. It can help a lot of people. I think Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO, talked about how language barriers can be broken, and you don't need to know language. Google already does this with their Google Translate, but this could take it to the next level. And with ChatGPT's human-like speech abilities, it can definitely take it to the next level.
Yeah, it'll be like Star Wars, right? You can have like a little translator in your ear. I'm so excited. That's one I didn't think of right now, but yes, that'll be really interesting. Like getting to the like, in the moment, being able to like translate both directions or whatever would be super cool.
Yeah, it's super helpful, and like you said, you touched on this, but right now you could use it more like a personal assistant, free of cost right now. So that's really cool. We will see how this goes. No, appreciate your time. This was super fun. I learned a lot about data literacy. Wrote down some notes: data literacy, customer focus, data maturity, and data everything.
Well, thank you. I mean, I really love to hear someone else's opinion about ChatGPT, who's really like being an AI, like being more curious and pragmatic about it. So it's good to hear that, some of the ideas that I have are validated. I'm not the only one thinking of it that way. So thank you so much for having me. It was so nice to catch up. I feel like, it wasn't that long ago that we were having some meetings together internally. So we should keep doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your insights, and we'll definitely leave your company's websites and LinkedIn and contact information with the podcast notes. So yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate you hopping on.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.